Often around this time, folks reach out to our office and say that they can tell that their value, according to our office, has stayed relatively flat over the last 10 years or so, but their property tax amount has increased tremendously in the past 10 or 15 years. And they ask, why is that? Well, two main reasons. One, of course, with inflation, higher costs of doing business at the local level, property taxes have been increased by levies to help pay for services that we all enjoy and use. On another point, though, and bigger, is actually there has been in the state of Ohio over the past 20 years or so a shift in the tax burden from the state level down to the local level in terms of where revenues come from and who actually pays for what services. And I'm not saying this is good, bad, or indifferent, but it's explaining a little bit more of why your property taxes are much higher and your income tax and others are much lower. So remember, in the state of Ohio, there are three main kind of sources of revenue that are available to certain types of governments, and that's income tax, property tax, and sales tax. At the state level, most of their revenue comes from income tax and sales tax. The state doesn't get any property tax, and in fact, the state actually subsidizes about 10% or so, on most cases, of residential property owners' taxes, in addition to things like homestead and other credits that the state actually pays for. Now, at the county level, we get revenue. Our main sources of revenue are sales tax and property tax. Ashtabula County, about half of our revenue comes from sales tax, and then roughly about 10% or so actually come from property tax, and the rest are made up in different areas. Then at your township level, you are primarily funded just through property taxes. At your first responder level, firefighters, our EMTs, our police, for example, that's predominantly property taxes. Schools, that's a mixture between property taxes and assistance from the state and the federal government, and one of our 7 districts now does have the option of an income tax. And at the village and the city level, they are predominantly property tax with the ability for an income tax, but they cannot do a sales tax. So you see there's some varieties of different ways that local governments can be funded. So what's happened over the last 20 years is the state has rolled back or lowered or gotten rid of altogether some different levels of taxes that were actually used to help subsidize or pay for local government services. So those are things like personal property tax, for example, and those are things like our income tax at the state level. The personal property tax was completely eliminated, and the income tax has significantly decreased over the past 20 years in the state of Ohio to make us more competitive. But what that means then is that the state has less funds to give to local governments from their income tax or from that personal property tax. And so as local governments, our first responders, our libraries, our schools, get less funding from the state and have more costs associated because of inflation, that's where the levies have come from. Local governments have had to increase their property taxes to be able to cover the difference and pay for that. Now, of course, that's local control. We, the voters, the taxpayers, have the ability then to say yes or no on those new property taxes. But one of the main reasons why we're even having to be asked to pass some of those property tax increases is because our income tax has decreased. And so the idea is that if the state decreases your income tax, that money you save, you can either decide to fund local services at the local level by property taxes, or you can vote no and keep that money as savings. Now, where this gets a little bit shaky, though, is to think about and remember who pays income tax, who pays property tax, and who pays sales tax. So if your income tax decreased, that means that our working folks have gotten a tax decrease, a tax break. But if in conjunction with a decrease in income tax, we've had increases in property tax, that means that anyone who owns property in the state of Ohio has had to pay more. So those are both working folks and non-working folks, our senior citizens, those who are disabled, anyone who owns property. But those who rent, even though they do pay taxes indirectly through their rent, aren't necessarily seeing the direct impact of an increase in the property tax. And then we've seen a good number of counties increasing their sales tax as a result of needing more funds for direct government services. So when we talk about the shift in the tax burden, it's brought down more to the local level, where local entities are getting their revenue more from local sources, our property owners. But this has caused a much higher burden on our property owners through higher property taxes to fund our local levels, as opposed to everything being more funded through income tax at the state level, or a variety of the three at the state level coming on down. So there's pluses and minuses, of course, with those. But it's one thing to think about. You can actually look back at your tax returns and at the different tax brackets over the years to see the decrease and the removal of some state taxes. But then, of course, as you get your tax bill, either through your escrow with your mortgage or directly from the county, you'll see more than likely, if voters pass them, increases in property tax. And it's all, of course, too, about what's the most fair way to fund local services. Our schools, our police, our fire, our parks, our libraries, county government services, of course, too, our roads as well. That all plays a part in these different shifts up and down. So always happy to help answer questions or help explain things more, but this is a quick little tutorial of where some of the tax decreases and increases have been happening over the past 20 years in the state of Ohio, and why, as you're paying your property taxes this year, you may see a much higher increase over the past couple of years, and why when you do your tax returns and file for your income tax with the state, you've been seeing a decrease.